Okay, so welcome everybody to this video. So I'm here with Chris, who is a previous client of mine, and Chris has come to share what I can only describe as the most amazing success story ever. And he just wants to share his success with people who can relate to his story. So Chris was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder back in 2019. And now in 2025, he's in the process of trying to have that diagnosis removed off his medical records because he no longer identifies as somebody with borderline personality disorder. And Chris was told back in 2019 that this was a disorder that would be a lifelong condition. And due to the progress he has made, he is just so passionate about sharing his story with anybody who is living with BPD because he strongly believes that we should not be telling ourselves that it's a lifelong condition because he's living proof that it isn't. So I'm going to let Chris say hi. And just, Chris, if you don't mind, just introducing yourself, telling everybody, like, who was Chris before he came into therapy, just before he got that diagnosis of BPD? How was life? What were you experiencing? How difficult it was for you? And what was it like being told that you had BPD when you were told it was a lifelong condition?
Yeah, it was. It's been a journey, that's for sure. It was mid 2019 when I got my diagnosis, which came as a bit of a shock. I'll be honest, because I felt like I knew quite a lot about mental health generally by that point, and I'd spent many years being very unwell. And I remember when I got the diagnosis, going through secondary care services at the time, why I went through a psychological formulation before I had the diagnosis. And I was speaking to my therapist, my then therapist, and my psychologist, who said, given the symptoms that I was presenting with at the time, they felt like that was probably the diagnosis that a psychiatrist would see fit best. And that's when I was given the framework for the recovery then, which at the time was dialectical behavioral therapy. So before the diagnosis, I was quite a chaotic person. And I always knew, I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression when I was very young. And I always knew that there was something else to it. I wasn't sure. Technically, I got a diagnosis of OCD in my mid-20s as well. What I came to realize is that over time, where a lot of these conditions tend to overlap quite significantly, actually. So the anxiety, the OCD, also with things like ADHD and autism as well. But essentially for me, how it manifested was with the main thing I would say is probably the difficulty in being able to actually regulate my emotions in any way, shape or form. And that wasn't necessarily always negative emotions. It could be positive emotions as well. It was almost like having this euphoric kind of episodes and then these completely depressive episodes, and there was no in between. And I would go from being completely elated one moment to suicidal the next, and my mood was extremely erratic all the time. I knew for a long time, especially going into my 20s, that something wasn't quite right, didn't know what it was. When I went back through secondary care services in 2019, I was told that this is what they thought it probably was. And lo and behold, I got the diagnosis. The first thing that I did, not knowing anything about it at the time, was when I walked out of the psychiatrist's office that afternoon, I went to my car, sat in my car, and I Googled it, which was a big mistake. And the first thing I remember seeing that really stuck out to me was that somebody had written a book about how to survive living with a partner who was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, because they were seen as being manipulative and abusive and things like that. And that was the first thing that I really saw. So straight away, I thought of myself as this awful human being. And I had to take a really long, hard look in the mirror, because I looked back at previous relationships, which is another thing that I struggled with, was interpersonal relationships, romantic or not. a lot of it stemmed from relationship issues with my parents as a child, which had a lasting effect. The trauma of that was long lasting, and it was very, very, yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think how to explain it, but I took it all the way through my adult life, I should say, struggling with relationships in every single possible way. And I think a lot of it had something to do with the fact that I didn't really know who I was, and I had this complete identity crisis where I didn't know who I was. I had no sense of self or belonging or meaning or anything, to the point where sometimes I genuinely would look in the mirror and not even recognize who I was looking at. And I did have that long, hard look in the mirror, and I had to sort of say to myself, all these issues that I've been having, and I've been living this chaotic lifestyle for such a long time. I was using alcohol and drugs all the time to help me manage my moods and my emotions. And I didn't want to carry on living that way. So I told myself that I needed to look inwards, because I kept pointing the finger everywhere else and everybody else was the problem. Whereas what I realized is that actually I was the common denominator, and that the work needed to start with me. So getting the diagnosis actually was, at the time, I didn't see it as a positive thing at all, but it did provide me with the framework, as I said, to start dialectical behavioral therapy, which I find really, really useful. It gave me some good tools to help me manage my emotions and things like that. But it didn't really help me with that sense of self, that like finding my identity and figuring out who I really was once I started to unpack all the trauma. So
you learned to manage the way you were feeling every day. So you were like able to, when you were in a low, you had the tools to bring yourself back up, but you still felt like there was stuff inside of you that just wasn't right. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly. And there were tools that helped me more so in crisis kind of situations. And the tools did work, and they helped to help me regulate a little bit. But actually, that was just masking the problem. That wasn't actually getting to what the root cause of the problem was. It was helpful in the moment, but then I'd just repeat the cycle and I'd end up in the same situation again. So I needed to start looking in and doing some more work on myself. And I'd had therapy previously for years and years, but the problem is that I'd always been through with various different therapists through various different services for years and years, but never really found anybody that I connected with until I met yourself 3 years ago.
Okay. And what was it that gave you that strive to reach out for? You just said that you've had therapy a number of times and it's not been successful. What do you think gave you that, that motivation to think, I just need to keep working on this. I'm not going to give up. And, what made you believe that, even despite the fact therapy hadn't worked, that actually I do believe that I can work through this? Because there must have been something inside of you that was like, because if you've tried a number of different therapies and they've not helped, at some point, a lot of people think therapy just doesn't work. What was different about you, do you think, that for, no, I'm just gonna, I know there's someone out there that can help me?
I think one of the big things really for me was that I had all this treatment and medication reviews and things like that, and then I decided I was working in a very, very, very toxic industry at the time. I worked in the motor trade. Working for a prestige brand was pretty taxing. I'd been doing it for quite a long time, was quite successful. And I decided that was one thing that I needed to change in order, if I wanted to increase the quality of my life, that was something that I was going to have to completely change. So in my early 30s, decided to have a complete career change and wanted to go and work in mental health services. Um, and I look, it's when I did eventually take the plunge and I went and worked, and I realised from working myself with other people as that support worker that I kept preaching to people about how consistency is key and you've just got to persevere with it, and etc. etc. But then realised that when I was struggling, there was a lot of change going on in my life at the time, and I really started to struggle with how I was coping with all this change, which is when I reached out to yourself. I had to kind of tell myself and take my own advice, the same advice I was giving people about. I need to keep at it. And I was hearing the same thing from other people, that they'd had multiple different therapists and psychiatrists, psychologists, and whatever it might have been over the years, and felt like they never really got anywhere. And I'm sort of saying to them, stick with it. Things do get better and stuff. When I realised that I needed a little bit more support myself, and I reached out to you, you were the first person that I had that worked with me consistently, sort of never let me down, always made time for me. But I think the biggest thing for me with working with you was that you always had belief in me that I would be able to get to a better place, get to where I wanted to be. And at first, as you know, I didn't know how that looked. I didn't know what that was going to be and how it would even look down the line. I couldn't even see. I mean, getting into my 30s was a pretty big deal for me, because growing up suicidal for most of your adult life, it was hard to see a week, a month into the future sometimes, let alone like where I was going to be. So when I turned 30, I genuinely didn't think I was going to make 30. So I had this big party when I turned 30. It's a bit of a celebration, really, that kind of made it this far, and I never thought I was going to.
You genuinely thought that you would have ended your life before your 30th birthday? That's how dark it got for you?
Yeah. Oh. And there were two attempts. And it wasn't just that either. There was incidents with the alcohol and the drugs that, if it hadn't been the suicidal thoughts that took me, it would have been the alcohol or the drugs.
Gosh, right.
In some way, shape or form. I mean, I broke my back when I was in my 20s, split my L2 vertebrae and was hospitalised, had to learn to walk again, all under the influence of alcohol. So, yeah, I realised that when I started giving a little bit more back, i.e. when I started working in mental health services myself, because I wanted to use my lived experience. And I was the first lived experience practitioner in, it was North Shropshire Community Mental Health Service at the time as well. So that was a big step into the unknown as well.
I remember getting that job. You were so happy, weren't you? Yeah.
Yeah, and it was great. Well, it didn't, it lasted for the best part of a year, and then I set my sights on something slightly different and started trying to progress through the industry. And it's been a journey. But yeah, I think the advice that I was giving people at the time, I realised I kind of wasn't really taking on myself, and when I was starting to struggle. And the other thing as well, as you'll know, you kind of get this empathy fatigue when you're taking on a lot of other people's stuff, whether that's consciously or subconsciously. And I remember I got a phone call from one of my patients who was having a complete breakdown, had completely lost it, and was ringing me telling me that they were going to take their own life. And in that moment, there was a part of me that kind of like, I know how that feels, and I never want anybody to know, like, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. I know how that feels, that the level of pain that person was in at the time, and it broke me and made me realize that, I've still got some work to do on myself as well, which is when I reached out to you.
Yeah. Excellent. And thankfully you did. So for anyone like watching who can already relate to what you've said, and they've tried loads of different therapy, and they're at the point where they've lost faith in therapy, and they're just accepting that this is how their life is going to be forever. Like, if you can just explain to them like why they should keep going, and what was different about working with me to other, was it the client and therapist relationship that we had? Do you think that's important? And what was different about what I did with you, versus what you've done in previous sessions, just to give anyone hope that. Because I have a lot of people who come to me who've had therapy before and it's not worked, and thank goodness they don't give up on it. But I know there is a lot of people that do, that say, oh, therapy doesn't work, I've tried it. So what would you say to those people?
I think the first thing I would say is that from my personal experience and my professional experience, I would say that the biggest contributing factor to the therapy being successful, I think, is the nature of the relationship, the professional relationship between yourself and your therapist, and vice versa. And I think that's where, like, when we met, we sort of really, really clicked. And I think for the first time, I felt actually that I genuinely wasn't being judged, which was always a fear that I had, particularly around a lot of the behavior that I exhibited that went alongside with the diagnosis that was seen as particularly problematic, which some people would perceive as manipulative, some people even perceive as abusive, some of the behaviors, which is it's all learned behavior. So it's not inherently who you are as a person. It's basically complex trauma that has caused you to develop these coping strategies and these behaviors as a self-defense mechanism. It is literally a response to trauma. It doesn't mean you're necessarily a bad person. It's just that we've learned these ways of how to survive in awful situations, and that's just something that you end up taking into life with you. But what I started to realize initially through working on the dialectical behavioral therapy stuff was that, you know, if it's learned behavior, you can unlearn it and you can learn a different way. And what I didn't realize at the time is that the most important relationship that I could have had with anybody at the time was with myself. And I didn't know that. And it was only through my relationship with yourself that I started to see that I could do the work. But it was only because I genuinely believed that you believed in me and that you thought that I had it in me to make the changes that I wanted to make. And I'd never had that with a previous therapist. I've never had somebody I felt like somebody was in my corner with me, do you know what I mean? Fighting with me rather than against me. And then again, I saw it and I implemented it myself in my professional capacity. I tried to make that relationship as dynamic and as caring and as loving as I possibly could, but made it about that person, that individual person. It's not a one size fits all with therapy. Yeah. So it was my approach became very person centered, and that's what I found with you. It worked for me professionally and personally.
Yeah, brilliant. And what is it that, out of all the things we've done, because I know we've done obviously loads, and it has been everyone I work with, I want to work with their relationship with themselves, because that's ultimately, you know, our experiences massively impact what we believe to be true about ourselves, the way we see ourselves, who we show up as in the world, how we see ourselves, because our brain distorts our perception of who we are based on our experiences. So I think that goes for many conditions that I work with. So you were no exception to that. I saw that you had this very distorted view of yourself, you know, straight from the first session. I just knew that the way you described yourself, I just thought, you know, you had a very low opinion of yourself, based on, like you say, your past behaviors, your diagnosis. You just didn't think much of yourself. So I knew straight away that was the problem. So out of all the things we've done to change that and get you to actually see yourself who you actually are, the guy you show up as today in 2025, who's doing amazing. Out of all the things we've done, is there like anything that stands out for you the most, or is it a combination of things? Like, you know, is there anything particular that you would?
I think honestly, it's just a combination of kind of the perfect storm, but in the right possible way. It was a bit of all sorts, and there's little bits and pieces that it kind of highlights for me, which I'll touch on in a sec. But there wasn't like any one specific thing, which I think was good, because again, as I said, not everything works for everybody anyway. But it was a combination of different things, and I felt like our therapeutic relationship I felt like I was valued as a person for a start, which particularly with, unfortunately, NHS services, you never kind of really feel like you are a person in those situations. And
so having someone believe in you is a big part. I agree.
That was the biggest thing, because one of the biggest kind of behaviors and symptoms of borderline personality disorder is this distorted image, this lack of worth and this persistent identity crisis. But I realized I'd learned these tools and tips to manage crisis situations, but never really did any work on me, like internally. And it was only through meeting you when we started to look at things like self-compassion and reframing things, which I find particularly helpful. And there's something that I use now with with the people that I manage now and the clients that I work with. And there was something that you said with me that stuck with me that I've used a couple of times in the last week already, where I had been through a lot of stuff even before the diagnosis, a lot of stuff. Lots and lots of trauma to unpack. But equally, since the diagnosis, I've also been through a lot of stuff that would be considered traumatic in and of itself as well. When I started to work on myself and realised that actually I was worthy, because I was always, after the diagnosis, I was always accepting of it. And I was always, because I always feel like acceptance is the first key to recovery, with whatever it might be, whether it's mental health, alcohol, drugs, gambling, whatever it might be, any kind of addiction. Acceptance is kind of always the first step. And I was fine with that. I accepted it from the outset. But what I didn't realise is that nobody else was going to do the work for me. So, I had to start looking at things differently. I had to reframe this. My mindset had to shift completely. So instead of this, like everything's always happening to me, it's always happening like against me, everything, it just felt like it was me against the world all the time. And I had the weight of the world on my shoulders. And I just kept thinking to myself, why me? Why me? Why me? Like, am I such a bad person?
Victim mentality mindset.
Yeah, like it was. And then you'd said something to me about how to reframe it. And it was, instead of asking myself why this keeps happening to me and, what have I done to deserve this? Am I really such a bad person? It was just a small thing that you'd said, which reframed it to, instead of saying, why is this happening to me? It was, what is this teaching me? Which was such a simple little thing. And then I went from then seeing every situation that was thrown at me, of which there was many, many, many curveballs, instead of looking at it as a negative kind of, why me? My mindset just shifted completely. And then it was, okay, hang on, this is going to teach me something. And I started to look at things differently. That I got to this point now, and I've been using skills to get to this point, but I realized that I needed to, the skill set that I had got me to a certain point. How was I going to continue to grow, and how was I going to continue to develop myself and become even more sort of emotionally intelligent, which is something that I feel like was there never even a term that was sort of coined or used in any way before I met yourself. And that's when we started working on this emotional intelligence, kind of understanding a little more about who I was and what sort of made me tick and things like that. I mean, I looked back on my past and I sort of made peace with it and kind of said to myself, well, yeah, maybe some of the things that happened to me weren't fair, and that's life. It is what it is. But instead of looking at it as a bit like a death sentence, which is kind of how I felt getting the diagnosis and being ill for so long, it was kind of like, oh, actually, hang on, I'm still here, and I've managed to get to this point now. What I'm going through now going to teach me, and what skills am I going to learn and develop and hone and improve that's going to take me to that next sort of stage of my life, and is going to take me to that next level of growth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So reframing things with regards to, because you said at the start, you really struggled to manage your emotions. How did that change? Did it change your emotions completely? So instead of having to manage them, your emotions changed?
Yeah, I would say they did. I mean, I feel like being able to regulate my emotions in the short term was a skill that I learned through dialectical behavioral therapy. But the long term kind of benefits of that, I never really, because that work needed to be done inside. And so I got into this frame of mind where I was like, okay, it's not my fault that this stuff happened to me as a kid and stuff, but no one else is going to fix me. It's not my fault, but it's definitely my responsibility to get it, fix it. You know what I mean? Like, no one else is going to be able to do it. But I needed somebody that was going to show me the way, and that's what you did for me. So yeah, I feel like the behaviors that I exhibited changed long term. I started to notice the difference when I started to become a bit kinder to myself. Yeah. And that was only through practicing self-compassion with you, which I quickly realized is kind of the antidote almost to that self-loathing, that lack of worth. Is the compassion is kind of the cure almost to that aspect of it. I once started being kinder to myself, and you said something else to me about starting to treat myself like my own best friend.
Yeah.
And it was like, instead of seeing myself as my own worst enemy and constantly criticizing myself and things like that, it was this, because I would do something stupid. I'd knock a glass of water over on a table or something and be like, oh, you idiot, like, how could you be so stupid, sort of thing. But then I'd have to make a conscious effort to be like, it's all right, like, it's just a little mistake, it's fine. And literally, it's as mad as it sounds, just talk to myself in that way, like I was talking to somebody, like a loved one or a best friend. So it was only when I started to be kinder to myself, I could manage my emotions in a crisis situation. I got quite good at that, practicing in the moment. But long term, the only way that I could effectively manage it long term was through that self-compassion to myself, which I didn't know was a thing until I met you.
I know we are taught to be kind to others, but we're not taught to be kind to ourselves. This is the problem. And when you've had a life, like you say, of challenging behavior, where you've admittedly said, your behavior wasn't great towards other people in relationships and stuff, it's really hard to then think, that you deserve that kindness. But understanding why you were behaving like that, like you say, it was never about you. It was your, it was coping mechanism. And it's being compassionate to the younger version of yourself that has had those experiences that have led to him then, being in survival mode. Being compassionate to him as well, that younger Chris, is just as important, isn't it? Because it was never his fault. It was, these things, we don't ask for these experiences to happen to us, do we?
No, absolutely not. And as I said, once I started seeing it as a strength instead of a weakness, it changed everything.
Absolutely. So being kind to yourself over the last 3 years, because we started working together, you're saying 2022. Obviously, we don't work together, although we do have the odd, you do email me still now, don't you, for the odd catch up when you want to talk things through. But over the last 3 years of being kind to yourself, how has your relationship with yourself? So how Chris used to see himself versus how Chris sees himself now. You said when you looked in the mirror, you just did not like what you saw. Like, how's that changed? What do you think now?
It's changed in every single way possible. It's not like I can even just say it's one thing. Everything changed. My entire outlook has changed. So instead of not even recognizing myself in the mirror sometimes, like, I've just learned to finally be able to accept me for who I am, flaws and all. I'm not perfect, and I never will be. Nobody is. There's no such thing. But I'm much more self-aware now, and I can recognize things in myself. Like, I've learned to understand so much more about myself. I've become much more emotionally intelligent, and so much so that I genuinely have now got, I mean, don't get me wrong, I still have my bad days. Everybody does, but I don't have these identity crises anymore. I'm comfortable with myself. I'm happy with my own company. I take myself away. I go for days on end hiking, and I disappear off into the mountains. I'm happy. I'm at peace with myself now. Learn to love myself, and that's great. So much so that actually I feel like I don't meet the criteria for borderline personality disorder or emotionally unstable personality disorder at all anymore. I don't have those mood swings. I don't have that need to want to mask any of my emotions with alcohol and drugs or use them as a coping mechanism. I don't have this constant battle with myself about who I am and why I'm here and what I'm doing. I've just found a bit of peace And
key, isn't it? Peace.
yeah,
That's what you get.
content.
You overcome these things. Peace. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've learned to just let go of any kind of resentment I had towards anybody in my past. And I genuinely do believe that I don't fit that criteria anymore for the specific sort of diagnosis for emotionally unstable personality disorder or borderline personality disorder. So, as you know, I'm looking at exploring having that diagnosis, or some people would say label, removed. I feel like it has held me back in some ways, having that kind of label. And although I never really saw it as a label as such, I know a lot of people do. It has definitely been a hindrance at times over the last few years for various different reasons, which is part of the reason initially why I started to kind of think about, well, if I don't meet the criteria anymore, can I have this diagnosis removed? And when we spoke about it, I said I was very conflicted. I used to do a lot of advocating for people with emotionally unstable personality disorder and borderline personality disorder, because I was working through it myself at the time. So I was kind of sharing the things that worked for me. And for quite a while now, I felt like I haven't met the criteria. And the work kind of slowed right down, where I felt like because I didn't meet the criteria, it wasn't my voice and it wasn't my place to stay anymore. But it was only through discussing it with you that I thought, you'd mentioned to me, well, why don't you use that and let that then be the inspiration and that the beacon of hope for other people, that actually it doesn't need to be a lifelong illness? Because a lot of people can make peace with it. They can come to terms with it and go, yeah, I've got this disorder. I think the problem, it could probably be worded better. I think a lot of people feel like with personality disorders, it makes you feel like there's something fundamentally wrong with who you are as a person, which, as I said, is just pure. It's just not the case. It's just nonsense. It's all learned behaviors. But as I said, without those behaviors anymore, I felt like I couldn't really do the advocating and be the voice for other people that I wanted to, or how I felt when I was going through it. So I stopped for a long time. And again, it was only recently through a conversation with you that I thought, no, actually, if I can have the diagnosis removed, and I'm living my life completely differently to how I was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I mean, even 3 years ago, and it is constantly changing. And I'd never say that I was fully recovered. I've done a lot of work with drug and alcohol clients. And, their journey is they could be sober for 10, 15, 20 years, and they would still say that they are recovering, a recovering addict, or they are an addict. Whereas for me, the difference is that I could be presented with an activating event, a triggering event that would have previously set me off on a particular pattern of emotional dysregulation and a complete self-destructive pathway. Whereas now I could have that same trigger and it wouldn't have anywhere near the same effect on me. So I know for a fact that I've done the work now and it's paid off, that I wouldn't meet the criteria. So that's why now I'm exploring having the diagnosis removed, not because I'm ashamed of it or I'm embarrassed about ever having the diagnosis. I'm not. It's made me who I am. And if I hadn't got the diagnosis, I wouldn't have put this work in over the last 6 years. It's as simple as that. But I want to get the diagnosis removed to prove to people that it isn't a lifelong condition, that actually, if you can learn a pattern of behavior to cope and survive, you can unlearn that and you can learn a healthier way of doing it. And as you will know, the brain can do that. Neuroplasticity means that we can actually do that. A physical structure of our brain can change to allow that to happen. It takes work. It's not a case of just sitting through therapy and just listening to somebody else talk back at you. It's taking on board what's said and putting things into practice, and it's over and it's repetitive and it's again and it's again and it's again, but it's forming new habits. It takes time. So yes, I'm going to try and get the diagnosis removed at some point, just purely because I want people out there to know that it can happen. You can get better and you don't have to live your life like that.
And when you say you can say for sure that any previous activating events that you would have struggled with would no longer trigger you. You can say that with conviction because the last 12 months you have had serious, one after the other activating events going. Like, I've been there along the journey. Like, Chris has had a really tough 12 months without going into any detail about it, but he's had a lot of challenges thrown his way, like with relationships and, you know, work and just an abundance of challenges a lot of people would struggle with. And you have proven every challenge that's been thrown at you, you have not only overcome it, but you have grown. You've used it as an opportunity to grow, and you've had that mindset that, like Blue said, what's this trying to teach me? You've took every challenge that's been thrown at you, you've said, what's this trying to teach me? You've gone in it with that mindset, and you've come out of it with a lesson that you've learned. And it's been so, honestly, it's been so inspiring for me to watch because, you know, you've shared them with me and it's been amazing. So you can say that with absolute conviction that no activating event now is going to trigger you because you've had some of the worst ones over the last 12 months, basically.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I manage things so much better now, and as I said, I think learning the short-term coping mechanisms that you get from the likes of dialectical behavioural therapy and even CBT, they're great, as particularly I think in crisis situations. But it's not until you actually start to look inwards and work on yourself and being that, like I said, learning to become your own best mate, really, that you get that long-term piece.
There's something about accepting yourself for who you are, which then helps you to become the best version of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. So just tell people a little bit about like where you're at with because obviously at the start of this session you said you didn't even imagine that you were going to get to your 30th birthday because you thought you would have ended things for yourself, which is so sad. And anyone watching this who is in that place, you know, please, you know, take Chris's story and, you know, use it as an inspiration and, you know, as proof that these things can be overcome. But you know, you didn't even imagine you were going to get to your 30th birthday. Just tell people like what your future looks like now, because since working with me over the last 3 years, you have like career-wise, you're just going up and up and up and up, aren't you? Like, what does the future look like for you, and how you're going to turn this into something great for other people, which you have been doing?
The honest answer is I'm not 100% sure, but that's absolutely fine. I'm just sort of take every day as it comes. But I can honestly say for the first time in my life, I'm genuinely excited about what the future has in store. And I would never ever have dreamt that I'd even get to a point where I could be looking forward to the future. You know, I until recently, you know, and I had no savings. I had no nothing. I never invested into my future in any way, shape or form because I thought, what's the point? I'm not going to be here. And that was my mindset through my teens, through my 20s. But now I'm starting to make the changes. I'm starting to invest in my future. Even things like, you know, trying to increase my pension contributions, just things like that I would never have ever considered previously. But you know, when in the midst of getting all the diagnosis and everything in 2019, my daughter was born that year. Unfortunately, because of everything that happened, I didn't meet until she was already 3. But the relationship with her has gone from strength to strength, and I'm looking forward to what the future has with her as well by my side. And yeah, I'm excited, and I'm just trying to take every opportunity that comes my way, and even if it's a negative, I'm trying to turn it into a positive all the time.
You even signed up for a counselling course, didn't you? Because you want to, you know, in your heart that you want to turn this bad experience that you've been through into something good for other people. So, and obviously you work in mental health, and you are, you know, you're determined to make a difference in the world now, aren't you?
Yeah, I did my time with the NHS and a community mental health team, and then I turned my attention to working with dual diagnosis clients with substance and alcohol problems, which is where I could use a little bit more of my lived experience, along with not just the mental health side of things. But yeah, I now it's just a case of wanting to give back. I find a bit of meaning in that, and because it's something that other people can relate to, they know that it's reciprocated. You know what I mean? There's that level of like mutuality when I'm sharing my story and people can relate to it. there is like every now and again you see these little light bulb moments, and it's really, really powerful. So that's now just something that I've decided I'm going to continue to do. I find it so rewarding compared to what I was doing previously in a sales type environment with cars, where it was just very cutthroat, no real friends or colleagues, everybody is an enemy. And yeah, it's given me a lot more purpose and meaning now. And I think the main thing now is I'm just grateful to be here. I'm grateful for the things that I've been through, because they've made me who I am today. And now I'm planning for the future. It's kind of scary, I must admit. It's a bit overwhelming when you haven't started until your 30s to sort of make that step. But I don't think it's ever too late to actually get to that point. You know, when I've worked with clients who have had substance issues, you know, that they didn't, you know, stop using until they were in their 50s, and now they're thriving, and now they're working, and they've, you know, they don't look back. And I don't think it's ever too late to change at all. I'm glad I did when I did. But yeah, there's still a lot of work to do. I think it never stops. Well, like I said, I would never say that I'm recovered. I would always probably say that I'm in recovery in my mental health generally. But I feel like, having not met the diagnosis criteria anymore for borderline personality disorder, I would say that I have recovered from that particular illness.
Yeah. Healing is a lifelong journey. I genuinely believe that, you know, healing is, and we should always want to keep working on ourselves, because the human brain is fascinating. The more, you know, the more time we spend, you know, trying to strengthen it, the better we become as people, isn't it? So yeah, for anybody watching this, then, if you just had to, you know, if they were sat in front of you now and they were feeling quite hopeless about their future, and a bit like you know, they couldn't imagine themselves living past their 30th birthday because they've had this diagnosis, and, you know, they're struggling with relationships, and they're struggling with finances, and they're struggling with career because of BPD, or any, I suppose, any mental health challenge, I suppose. Let's not just limit it to BPD, because, you know, as you know, I believe that all mental health challenges can be overcome. You know, we just have to get to the root of the problem and kind of work on that. What would you say to them if you had just a couple of minutes with them? What would you say to them?
Be kind to yourself and just keep going. Simple as that. Just keep. You never know. Sometimes that epiphany moment comes in. It could be a random conversation with a stranger. In my case, it was a conversation with yourself about that reframing. It was that moment from, you know, instead of what is this? Why is this happening to me? To what is this trying to teach me? Just keep going. Just keep going. There's the light always is just around the corner. You just have to stick at it, but learn to be kind to yourself.
Find someone that believes in you, because I think that's really important. That you said that, you know, that you said the one different thing is that you felt that I believed in you, and I genuinely do believe that. I think when we have somebody who believes in us, it just sparks something in us, because if someone else can believe in us, you know, there must be something about me. If they believe in me, there must be something about me. It just gives you that bit of hope that you might not have had yourself. So find that person who believes in you as well, that can.
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's not always, you know, I had to go through probably best part of a dozen therapists and psychologists and things over the years before I found you. But it could happen for anybody at any given moment, and it doesn't have to be a therapist as such. You know what I mean? Someone that,
yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I think having that belief, or that knowing that somebody has that belief in you, was a bit of a game changer for me, because, as I said, I never felt like a person to anybody else previously. So that was the biggest factor for change with myself.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you. And I do, anyone watching this, you know, Chris's story is inspiring, but, you know, there are many stories out there of people who overcome many challenges. It's been spoken more and more about, you know, on social media and things. You know, there's nothing we can't overcome with the right support. Like you say, someone believing in you, taking that time to work on yourself. I genuinely believe we can overcome anything. So you know, please don't give up. Don't give up, and just keep watching this video back just to remind yourself that, you know, Chris is someone who's done this. It's possible for you too. It absolutely is.
Oh, if I can do it, anybody can.
Yeah. Well, honestly, like I always say to Chris, you are amazing. Like you said before, it's not easy. This journey isn't easy. And the therapist is only a small part of it. Like I show up, I help you, I give you the tools. You then have the responsibility to go away and use them. I can't do that for you. And I always say to anyone I work with, like, there's 168 hours in a week, and I'm spending one of them hours with you. The other 167 have got to be utilized, and that's what you did, Chris. Like you make sure you utilize those extra hours in the time when you weren't with me and you were coming back to the sessions. You were doing the work, which is why you have got the results that you've got. So, you know, well done you. I'm excited for the future for you. Really am. Really am.
Thank you. And so am I for the first time.
No, it's a great story. Thank you so much, honestly, for taking the time to
Thank you, Leanne.
story. Take care.